Okay, so some big news coming out of the AFL in Australia. Gil McLachlan, the CEO of the AFL, is to stand down at the end of the season. Now, when he took over 8 years ago, the Essendon peptide scandal was in full swing and hadn't even been fully, the Asada investigation and the bans for players and the punishment for the club hadn't been fully, resolved at that point. So early on, from the very first days in the job, he's fighting fires, and that was possibly the biggest scandal, one of the biggest challenges the AFL has ever seen. And there has been scandal in the AFL, and there has been player ill discipline and salary cap breaches, but that I have to admit was the biggest scandal, not only for the AFL but for Australian sport, because it affected the NRL as well. That Australian sport had never seen, and it was early on in his tenure that was still a major issue that the league had to resolve. Essendon are still recovering from that peptide scandal. People lost their jobs. Dimitri, the former CEO, stood down in the midst of that scandal. So he was in a very difficult situation from the get go, and we can argue whether the AFL handled it well, handled it badly. Was the punishment too much for Essendon? Was it too little? Um, and those arguments will rumble on with fans and commentators of the sport until the next major scandal comes along, and then the comparisons will be drawn. But that was a big thing to deal with, and he dealt with it because guess what? He's still CEO to this day until the end of this season. So it obviously didn't affect him that much because they got through it, rightly or wrongly, and however they dealt with it, the AFL got through that scandal. The reputational damage had been done, but they got through that scandal. The continued support for the two expansion clubs in Greater Western Sydney and Gold Coast, the AFL was keen to take the NRL on its own game. Obviously, the NRL expanded into Melbourne in 1998, and the AFL was keen to take on take them on and expand into traditional rugby league heartlands. And obviously, the AFL had obviously seen what had happened with the NRL in the 90s with the Super League rivalry between Super League and the New South Wales Rugby League that resulted in the formation of a new league. The AFL had witnessed disunity, and therefore I think has been a more stably governed league than the NRL. To be CEO for 8 years, you've got to be doing something right, but it does take a lot out of an individual, and he looked absolutely worn out and exhausted during his press conference. You could see the strain that this decision is. He's been contemplating this decision for quite some time. The strain it's put on him, but yeah, the continued support for the expansion clubs was a key thing for the AFL. They went to these locations and they were basically pumping money into these clubs so they could be stable and competitive. Now, you could argue, should they have gone to Tasmania? That's still a talking point. Should the AFL had actually put one of those clubs, instead of, let's say, in Gold Coast or Great Western Sydney, in Tasmania, a more traditional AFL player bed heartland, fan base heartland? A lot of players who currently play in the AFL obviously are from Tasmania, big fan base in Tasmania. Alongside cricket, it's one of the two most popular sports in the state, and not having a permanent team there is a bit of a bugbear for some fans. I know there's not a lot of corporate money in Tasmania, but the island state is footy mad. It is, and I think it could work in Tasmania. I think, yes, the fan base would be a little bit smaller and a little bit less money, but they would sell out every game. I have no doubt on that. So yes, the support for the expansion clubs in the locations they chose on the East Coast is there. But Great Western Sydney don't even play in Sydney; they play in Canberra. So how much of a success have those expansion clubs been? It's been a key AFL policy that they have supported during his tenure and before. And it will be interesting to see what the new CEO does in regards to supporting those two expansion clubs and looking at Tasmania for possibly a relocation or an expansion at some point. That is a debating point. Finally, the AFL dealing with COVID. The NRL didn't deal with the initial part of COVID very well because Todd Greenberg, the then CEO, lost his job and was replaced by Andrew Abdo. And when it comes to governance, the NRL decided to look outside the box for its current governance team of Peter V'landys and Andrew Abdo. They're not rugby league people. V'landys is horse racing, and Abdo he's a commercial guy. He's a businessman. And you could argue their rule changes and some of the structures in place, for better or for worse, has divided fans. McLaughlin has been involved with the AFL in head office for 20 odd years. He was an internal appointment. So that's going to be interesting because the AFL have already stated the commission are going to say, look, we're looking internally for his successor, be it male or female, man or woman. The successor to Glenn McLaughlin will be someone from inside the AFL, from either clubland or inside head office. Now, whether that's a good or bad thing, taking the sport forward, again, is up for debate. But this decision making it now, while it's a bit surprising, gives the AFL Commission time to interview the right candidates and therefore make the correct appointment. Now, there's some big things that are yet to happen in the middle of this season that will be, felt by the new CEO come the start of next season. There's some big decisions that McLaughlin and the AFL as an organisation have to make before grand final day. They've got a new TV deal they've got to negotiate, media rights deal. Now, the media companies are now fully aware that he is standing down. He's not going to be at the negotiating table for the next media rights and broadcast rights deal. Could that impact how much the AFL and the broadcast partners, how much the deal's worth? Does that give the advantage to the broadcast companies to go, well, we don't know what your success is going to be like, what the relationship's going to be like, how that's going to impact the negotiations. We know how you negotiate, but will your successor be happy with the deal we negotiate? So the focus on the new TV deal is important, and it'll be interesting to see how much that deal is worth to the AFL and how much the broadcasters are willing to pay for said deal. The Players' CBA for both the men and women's game is also up for negotiation. And again, obviously, this is the last CBA he will negotiate. The players' associations, obviously, the players' unions are going to be involved. And because he is standing down at the end of the year, will that have an impact on the CBA and the direction the AFL takes? Because the new CEO might decide to take the league in a different direction. They may go, we are going to Tasmania, we are relocating a team. Be it Great Western Sydney or Gold Coast, most likely if they were to go to Tasmania. We may want to expand further to 20 teams. You just don't know. So that Players' CBA and the TV deal negotiations is going to be very, very interesting to see what agreements occur from that. Now, there's no inclination that there's going to be any issues renegotiating the new CBA for the players, and there's no inclination that the TV company is going to play hardball over the TV deal. But it is interesting that he's announced that he's standing down before these negotiations have been completed. Very, very interesting, the timing when you've still got to negotiate these things. Also, they've got to continue with their club funding model. Now, the new CEO may disagree with that funding model. So again, with these major important decisions that need to be taken before the end of the season, it will have an impact. When the new CEO comes in, they may not be happy with the TV deal and may go, well, we undervalued our product. Or the TV companies go, we're paying too much for the product. So the CBA, the players may not be fully satisfied with their CBA. Or the new CEO may be going, we've given too much to the players. So it is very, very interesting, the timing of his resignation announcement. However, it does mean that the AFL Commission can now focus on finding a replacement. It gives them enough time to announce a replacement in due course. And it means he can now solely focus his attentions on these negotiations about the CBA and the TV deal. But how do you feel as AFL fans about how Gil McLaughlin has performed as CEO over the 8 years he's been in the position? Do you think that they handled the peptide scandal well, badly, average? Do you think the support for the expansion clubs was justified? Would you have liked the AFL to expand in a different location? Tasmania being the question mark there. And how well do you think the AFL and Gil McLaughlin dealt with the COVID pandemic and restarting of play back in 2020 and working with the restrictions that the state and territory governments imposed upon the playing group and the support staff when it came to isolation, testing? Do you think the AFL did a better job than the NRL or a worse job? How did they perform during the last 2 years? Because looking at his resignation announcement, he looked absolutely physically worn out. He looked exhausted. I don't blame him for going, I think I've taken the AFL as far as he can. But he survived the COVID pandemic, whereas Todd Greenberg, his rival at the NRL, didn't. That's an interesting one. So there we go. Gil McLaughlin is to step down as AFL CEO at the end of the season. Please place your thoughts in the comment section below. If you feel I've missed anything out in his 8 years in charge of the AFL, please feel free again to mention in the comment section below, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.